Welcome to today's episode of the L&D Clinic for HR Professionals, proudly brought to you by Habify, experts in making sure your staff remember what you train them. In today's episode, we interview Lisa Harrison of the Maitland Group. She shares her insights on COVID-19, how to build better teams, and the future of employee engagement, productivity, and motivation in the new virtual workplace. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us today. I know you're a busy lady, so we'll keep this intentional. You have your master's in organizational psychology, and you've been head of talent at Maitland for nearly 3 years now. Back in 2017, what was the biggest challenge that you faced when you started your new team?
When I arrived at Maitland, there wasn't really best practice implemented in all the different areas that talent looked after at the time. There was a lot of good practices. There was some onboarding, there was some recruitment, there was some training, but the scientific application of best practice wasn't necessarily harnessed in each of the areas, and processes wasn't the same on a global scale. And at that stage, it was a strategic imperative for the business to try and get it to be more standardized across the different businesses, and to make sure that in some cases where it wasn't as good as it could be, that new processes was in place to make it as good as it could be.
Right. And tell me, how was that received? Because, you know, people are generally averse to change. And in a large organization like Maitland, I'm sure you certainly had a couple of people to convince. How was it received in the short and then obviously the long term?
I think a lot of the executives was quite keen on it. For each of the areas, I had to first do a presentation to show what is the current practice, what is the current status quo in the different jurisdictions, and then to show what the benefit would be to change it to a more standard process. And standard process is such a cliche, but if it's a good process and there's some metrics built into it and there is some outcomes that's more tangible, then it makes sense to change it. So I'll use recruitment as an example here. At that time, where I started looking at recruitment, and it was happening different in the different jurisdictions. We didn't have a good system that was being used because the requirements in each jurisdiction was so different. So we had to find software. Well, I really encouraged finding software that would be able to be configurable enough for each of the jurisdictions to speak to what they need. And then on top of the system requirements, there was a process requirement to make sure that we really do the best we can do. So for example, people arriving at reception, and then for receptionists already to know their names and to say, "Hi, Johnny, welcome to the interview. So-and-so will be with you soon." So it's those little touches and putting it into a process, making sure the benchmark information for different roles is done upfront so that it doesn't waste any time in the process by being later in the process when managers are now at the point of looking at the different CVs, that they're really motivating if they need a change in total cost of employment upfront. So these process elements really wasn't just thought up by myself. You involve the rest of the team. So you already have a lot of these ideas yourself because you've seen them in practice in different places, and you've gotten, you know what you need to get out of it. You want the person to feel special and have a great branding experience of your business, but you also want to involve everyone in the process, and you get some really good ideas from the team members and different things that they do in their different jurisdictions or global locations. So everyone involved in it, and then you put that forward.
Just moving on from this, I'd like to just chat about COVID-19. We all know that it's quite topical at the moment. You know, I think we might have a little bit of a COVID-19 overload, but just quickly describe to me the journey from the context of a global business. You know, how has Maitland supported employees during this pandemic? Because each company has taken a similar and yet different approach.
Yes, so you're definitely right with a lot of COVID-19. Nearly every conversation with different staff members at the moment is something along the lines of, and how is working from home treating you? What are the things that your challenges that you're dealing with?
Right, right.
So I think in a way it has also helped us to really get in touch with each other's different situations, and it could have actually brought us closer together. But when it started, I must be the first to admit, our business put together a global crisis committee, and it was really early on. It was still when it was China that was the focus of everything, and
yes.
I thought that it was a bit of an overkill. I thought, oh yes, now another committee set together, but turns out that became a critical committee that had to make a lot of quick decisions, and lots of communication sent out to different employees at a real quick pace. So I think a global crisis committee was definitely handy. We put together a policy that would help employees with different decisions that they had to make if they were dealing with clients, for example. And there was a lot of video content sent out. Our CEO also sent out weekly updates from a video perspective, on a video link to staff. Throughout the journey, it started off very calm, and then suddenly it just started hitting all our European offices. And then it was much more advanced there than, for example, in the South African context or the Mauritian context. It was first Europe, but then soon the cases started arriving, and the fear really started arriving at the southern jurisdictions.
Right.
But we learned from what had happened in some of the northern jurisdictions. And I think something else we've done from a business perspective is we've sent out a survey, an engagement type of survey, but one specifically asking about the COVID-19, our response to the COVID-19, and that has just concluded actually. So we'll be able to do some good stuff with the report and the comments that we see from people. We have started using our Teams platform to do many more group meetings, and there's been encouragement from each of the MDs in the different businesses and our group businesses to have more frequent communication, to set up. We had to eventually move everybody in the lockdown to be working from home, and that was especially, it was easier in some of the European businesses where most people have limitless, no restrictions on their data bundles.
Right.
In the South African context, that was a lot more difficult, especially for positions. Not all positions had laptops, so some had to take their desktop with all the equipment and printer and whatever else they need home with them.
Yes.
And all we needed to arrange transport for that. There was a few key positions that would have still needed to come into work, so we had to arrange Uber for them and make sure that all the legislation around that, whether it's now temperature testing or questionnaires that they have to fill out, all of that is being done. And then just generally checking the mental well-being of staff, because there is it's a huge challenge for some staff are at home alone and they don't have the support of family around them. Others are separated from their family, that's in other countries, and they're feeling that anxiety of not being able to get
isolation.
To them. Yes, there's a lot of anxiety. And another trend that I'm seeing at the moment is it feels as if that work-life balance is a little bit blurred. Employees are working a lot longer hours than they would actually work in the office. I don't know, maybe it is just from my perspective in the HR world that my inbox is so busy at the moment with all the changes, but there is a lot of traffic and there is a lot of communication, and instead of just walking over to someone and clearing something up, now there'll be a few emails back and forth about it.
Right.
So,
and instant messages.
One of my colleagues in Isle of Man coined the Isle of Man staff coined the phrase fast and fluid. So it's fast and fluid environment.
You heard it here first, everybody. You heard it here first. Fast and fluid. We're coining it all the way from the Isle of Man. Thank you, Lisa. Great. So you actually answered part of my next question, which was, how will employee engagement, productivity, and employee motivation be fostered in this new way of working? Obviously data is an issue, security is an issue. Tell us just very quickly, what sort of steps have you taken? What are your plans in the future, just to sort of maintain that employee motivation? Because productivity is absolutely key, and we're focusing on results of work.
That will vary depending on the business and the business department. But I think one of the challenges is that some employees may take it upon themselves to be very productive at the moment, whereas others may be in the cultural dynamic where they're waiting for instruction.
Right.
And not all managers are as good to set up regular meetings and delegate. And so some may just take it on themselves and end up very busy without their team members waiting for direction. So it's to get past that cultural dynamic that may have been easy to take place in an environment where everybody sits in the same office, but the new virtual management style and management necessities is something that people will have to learn. Will have to learn if they haven't already. This is the greatest work from home experiment anyone has ever done. So the whole world is experimenting with this at the moment. Yes.
And what's quite interesting from a training perspective, I've also noticed this. We know as professionals in the L&D space that human beings don't naturally know how to write an email. It's not something that is, it comes naturally. You actually have to learn the way of communicating on email. And I think that we are presupposing that people know how to have virtual meetings and how to work remotely. But in actual fact, that's not necessarily the case. And I think you were talking about that anxiety. I think what really feeds into that anxiety is, am I doing this right? And I think it's important to have a focus on educating people on how to work remotely, how to engage virtually, because like you mentioned earlier, that isolation, I don't know if you've seen that video where a group of people were having a work meeting, and the one gentleman forgot to switch off his camera. He got up from the meeting, obviously had a collared shirt on, and walked to his kitchen in his underpants. It's little things like that we may miss. And people need to be educated on this. Yeah, so just make sure you know where the buttons are. Now, quickly, I just want to just touch on this. Studies have shown that employees work much more efficiently when they understand what's required of them. When we're talking about training now, this is true for training application as well. But what do you do as an experienced HR professional to make sure that the content covered in any kind of training actually sticks? I mean, do you find that re-engaging with employees with the training material helps? Do you find that accountability plays a big issue in staff actually applying what they've been trained?
So I'm a firm believer in applying a blended approach to learning, or multiple channels, or whatever the coin is that you may have with that, meaning that you don't just go to a classroom, do a day's worth of training, leave, and then that will just happen, and you're going to now apply the training in your context and understand what that means. And often when people get to the working environment, what they call transference, I'm sure you all know the term, but transference means you can apply what you're learning in the environment easily. There's often resistance from the rest of the team that frown upon you. Why are you doing it in that way now? That's not how we do it around there. So there's all sorts of barriers to actually apply the learning that you've learned successfully in your context, and even to remember what you've learned in one day. So if you spread it over time in bite-sized chunks, and you reinforce that message the next time you meet with everybody, and there's some sort of other channel and other information. So whether it is articles that are conveying similar or the same message, whether it's
resources,
that's it, other methods of learning. So whether it is e-learning that accompanies it, whether it is practical application, you've got some homework to do to apply something and bring it to the next class. So those kind of that kind of application has got a much higher retention value to remember what you've learned, and even better if you can include the whole team in the training, because especially if it's got to do with something that's behavioral rather than just a pure knowledge-based type of exercise. That helps if the whole team is on the same page and they speak the same lingo and they can understand what the purpose is of applying certain things that somebody else might wonder why are you even doing this, and sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. So it helps for everyone together to get to understand the key principles and hold each other accountable based on that knowledge.
So a couple of things stood out for me in what you've just shared. The first thing is the why. You know, if people that you can learn something, but to actually apply it, to make it a behavior, to really embrace it, it's important to understand the why of that particular training. So that really resonated with me. And in terms of accountability, it's great as a team to hold each other accountable. But if the training is for you and your own personal development, you know, often what happens is people fall off the wagon because life happens. We get busy and our learning sort of, you know, falls down the tier ladder. And it's worthwhile having some form of coaching built in there somewhere, just to ensure that you stay the course. I'm sure you've been coached, and I'm sure you've coached yourself, and you know the value that comes with having someone supporting you in order to complete and to try and implement new distinctions. Do you think that coaching en masse is a viable option? I mean, if you could combine training with coaching, do you think that would be a good solution to knowledge retention?
Absolutely. Coaching, even, and you said in group or mass, yes, group coaching does help. There you can do coaching circles, especially when it comes to something like leadership training. You can put coaching circles in place just to re-emphasize in the context that different managers work with, and they can learn from each other as well. So facilitate, you don't have to be the knowledge bearer of everything. That different people can learn from each other. But one-on-one coaching is helpful as well, especially when it comes to overcoming transference barriers and understanding the lessons in the context of your own environment. And that speaking with somebody else through those messages and through those obstacles that you experience, through the situation that you find yourself in, really helps to put it in objective light. And often the person, just by explaining it to somebody else, can already understand their context better and understand how to apply what they've learned better.
Great. Okay, one last question before you go, because I know you're a busy lady. So as we move further into the world of virtual training, training staff on a global scale can come with its own challenges, as I'm sure you've experienced. How do you manage to overcome these challenges?
This question actually very much relates to the current future world of work that we find ourselves in now. And we're lucky as a business at Maitland already to have a step ahead many other businesses that are now forced to work from home. I think that the future will mean a lot more virtual training. So having learned a few lessons already helps a lot. And it depends on people's buy-in as well. I think it will be a while for us in this new normal before we get back to the scenario where it will be back to a lot of social interactions and group-based training. I think there'll be elements of virtual built into it for most providers. And I'll give an example. So we've had training sessions before where we've had individual members from different parts of the globe dialing into it. The idea was great. The idea was brilliant. Break them into different classrooms, let them share their experiences with each other, and then they can learn from the management in the different businesses as well. It gives them global exposure, and they can learn that way. Unfortunately, because there was such differences in the cultures, differences in the how outspoken some of these individuals would be, and also technology differences and lags, it really was difficult to get that off the floor successfully. And we found that it would actually be better if we have the virtual presenter with a group of either employees in the same office or from the same office dialing in, and smaller groups rather than larger groups, just to facilitate that two-way dialogue. Because two-way dialogue is very difficult. It's not impossible, but it means that presenter must be experienced in this. We've also used some new presenters in times with new platforms, and then you have all the teething problems that go with that. So you could spend half the session just trying to sort out technology and who's putting what on mute, and then there's an echo because somebody's trying to do it from a meeting room and the colleague next to them has also got their computer on. So you need to sort those, the experienced trainers sort that kind of thing out ahead of time and give a list of do's and don'ts, and this is how you're going to interact, and can manage it from a central base. So I think it's helpful that Maitland has already walked some of this mile, and I'm happy to share that with any of our HR colleagues dialing in and watching this clip. I think the future is going to see a lot more of this.
Amazing. Lisa, it has been such a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you for joining us on the L&D Clinic.
Thank you. Thanks, Jordan.
Great. Cheers.
Thanks for joining us on the L&D Clinic. If you have someone you would like us to interview, please drop us a line and we'll do our best to make that a reality. Thanks for tuning in.